This is crazy.
When there are no eggs left at Walmart, the shelves are bare, but you can get happy eggs for $19.
I stopped at the Walmart in Pflugerville, Texas today, and the shelves were all empty.
A food crisis is spreading fast across America. Not in some distant corner of the world, but right here, in the very heart of 10 states that once formed the backbone of the nation's agriculture and food supply chain.
There's no meat, no toilet paper. It's crazy.
Since August 1st, when President Trump's new tariffs officially took effect, a chain reaction has begun. Exports have been blocked. Goods are piling up. Factories are shutting down. Farmers are abandoning their fields. And working families are facing the unthinkable hunger on American soil. This is no longer a warning. It's reality unfolding hour by hour, day by day. And what's most painful, this crisis stems from the very policies once praised as protecting America.
We will make America strong again. We will make America wealthy again. We will make America prosper again.
In this video, we'll uncover the brutal truth, where 10 states are sinking into the worst food shortages in decades. Not because of natural disasters, but because of backfiring tariffs. And if this trend continues, what will happen to the rest of America? Number 1, Nebraska. Over 9 million tons of corn. That's how much Nebraska harvested last year. But this year, production is projected to drop by more than 40% in just the third quarter alone, according to the state's Department of Agriculture. Not because of weather-related crop failure, but because hundreds of fields were left abandoned mid-irrigation when broken equipment couldn't be replaced in time. The supply chain for irrigation machinery and parts has been thrown into chaos by tariffs on European manufacturers since early August, driving import prices up 35% in just 2 weeks. For farmers in counties like Buffalo or Dawson, this isn't just about losing thousands of dollars per acre. It's a double disaster. They can't sell their corn and they don't have enough left to feed their own families. Some small farms have been forced to ration every sack of corn. They keep grinding it into meal to make cornbread for the entire month. Convenience stores in small towns report bread prices doubling in just 6 weeks, while milk and fresh produce barely arrive at all because the domestic trucking system is prioritizing deliveries to big box supermarkets. In the city of Kearney, the local food bank is reporting a level of shortage they've never seen before. In July and the first half of August alone, the number of families seeking aid jumped from 420 households to over 100. They're not coming because of chronic poverty. They're coming because the system they relied on collapsed too fast, too suddenly. Crisis doesn't always come from violent storms. Sometimes it comes from a policy that looks perfectly reasonable on paper. When farmers can no longer control the price of the corn they grow. When 1 bushel of corn doesn't even buy a single loaf of factory-made bread. When families who once lived on their own harvest are now standing in line for instant noodles. That's when Nebraska stops being the Nebraska people thought they knew. Number 2, Iowa. This place was once seen as the proud agricultural heart of America. With endless fields of corn and one of the largest livestock operations in the country, few ever imagined the day would come when this very place would face food shortages in its own communities. Since August 1st, the cascading tariffs imposed by President Trump's administration on Canada, Mexico, and the EU have tightened the noose on the agricultural supply chain. Input costs have surged, especially fertilizer and fuel, while stockpiled corn and soybeans can't be moved because international contracts were either canceled or rerouted to Canada. The result, countless farms in Iowa have been forced to scale back or shut down entirely. But the problem isn't just about not being able to export. The bigger and more heartbreaking problem is that working families here can no longer afford food as prices skyrocket, supplies dry up, and aid programs are cut. According to local data from Feeding America, the number of residents turning to food banks in counties like Polk, Lynn, and Woodbury has jumped more than 70% compared to last year. Places that once never ran short on eggs, milk, or fresh meat now only have canned goods or stale bread left. Some food distribution sites report having to turn people away because they ran out of supplies before they even opened their doors. In many rural school districts, children now get their only real meal of the day at school. And if those schools close due to financial strain or lack of federal funding, countless kids will simply go without proper nutrition. Even farmers, the very people who once supplied beef and pork to the entire country, are now relying on food stamps just to buy milk for their own children. Small-town grocery stores aren't faring any better. Many have shuttered permanently because of unstable supply lines and soaring transportation costs. Meanwhile, big retail chains prioritize shipments to urban centers, leaving rural Iowa to struggle with crippling shortages. Iowa, a state that once fed millions of Americans, is now struggling to feed itself. Not because the land has turned barren, but because policies made far away have strangled the very people who were once called the backbone of America. And if even Iowa is falling into this state, what does that mean for the rest of the nation? Number 3, Indiana. In the suburbs of Indianapolis, something strange is happening. The supermarket shelves are still stocked, but more and more shopping carts are empty. Not because there's no food, but because people simply can't afford to buy it. Indiana isn't a state where crops have been blocked. It doesn't have vast cornfields like Iowa or jammed export ports like Louisiana. But people here are enduring another kind of food crisis. Quiet, but no less brutal. The tariffs imposed on August 1st sent energy transportation and food processing input costs soaring so fast that local factories were forced to cut production. A huge portion of affordable locally produced food for low-income families has simply vanished from the market. When budget-friendly canned goods disappear, residents are left to choose between buying expensive fresh food or buying nothing at all. But here's the bitter truth. The food is right there sitting on the shelves. They just can't reach for it. A kind of indirect hunger. Hunger not from scarcity, but from being priced out. In low-income neighborhoods like Hawville or Martindale-Brightwood, many families have reverted to stretching thin porridge reusing stale bread or boiling one egg to split between 2 meals. Diners that used to serve $3 meals now charge $5.50. For those earning under $100 a week after taxes, that jump is enough to wreck an entire month's budget. Schools in the area are reporting another troubling sign: kids fighting over leftover meals or asking to take extras home for their younger siblings. This never happened before, not even during the pandemic. There are no abandoned fields here, no farmers weeping in their crops. But on the other side of the distribution system, a whole class of people is being quietly squeezed. They don't farm, they can't negotiate with the government, and no one is speaking for them. And the cruelest part, they are hungry in a state full of food. Hungry in the very heart of the supply chain. Because policy has made the price of a single meal climb beyond the reach of ordinary people. Number 4, Illinois. In the southern suburbs of Springfield, something feels wrong every weekend. Farmers markets that once bustled with neighbors gathering to buy and trade fresh produce now stand nearly empty. Just a scattering of stalls. The calls of vendors and the rumble of delivery trucks have been replaced by stillness and silence. Sellers aren't showing up and buyers have nothing to bring home. Illinois isn't just an industrial state. It's also home to thousands of small farms that supply vegetables, poultry, and fresh milk to local markets. But ever since domestic supply chains were upended by tariffs, especially on imported goods like packaging, cold storage equipment, and fuel, farmers can no longer afford to get their products to distribution points like they used to. The new policies have accidentally driven up domestic logistics costs. Many small co-ops can't handle the sudden spike in transport expenses, forcing them to cut delivery routes, halt supply, or only sell through big contracts. Local farmers markets, the very places that once kept rural communities stocked with affordable fresh food, have become the first casualties. What's the result? Families living within 50 to 100 miles of farmland now have to drive for hours just to find fresh greens or unfrozen meat. For the elderly or low-income households without transportation, access to fresh food has become nearly impossible. In Macoupin County, reports are surfacing of residents buying eggs out of the backs of trucks, from sellers with no clear sourcing, no safety inspections, simply because they have no other option. Some families are switching to canned goods and instant noodles as their primary food for the week. That shift is quietly eroding generations of healthy eating habits once rooted in rural life. The hunger here doesn't stem from a lack of food. It stems from imbalance. From a system that once made local produce easy to reach, now making it harder to buy a vegetable here than in the middle of the city. And in the silence, those country markets are vanishing, along with the belief that living close to farmland meant you'd always have enough to eat. Number 5, Minnesota. On a Monday morning in Red Lake Nation in northern Minnesota, a mother stood in front of an empty fridge. Inside, there was nothing left but a single piece of frozen meat from 2 weeks ago and a faded bag of frozen vegetables. The family's pickup truck had run out of gas on Friday, and the nearest gas station was 23 miles away. Outside, the August sun was already scorching. This isn't a rare story. Thousands of families in Minnesota's native communities are facing severe shortages of fresh food. And what they're battling isn't just hunger, but the crushing sense of being forgotten. Since the start of August, new tariff policies have sent transportation costs for goods to remote areas skyrocketing. Items that were already expensive, milk, fresh vegetables, fresh meat, have nearly vanished from stores on reservations. According to the Tribal Food Sovereignty Network, the cost of shipping from Minneapolis to northern Minnesota has jumped more than 45% in just the first 3 weeks since the tariffs took effect. While major cities can pivot to alternate supply chains, native areas often rely on just 1 or 2 distributors. Once that pipeline clogs, there is no fallback. Federal food assistance programs like SNAP are still in place, but prices are rising faster than the value of the benefits. In some places like Monoman County, residents report they can now buy less than half the groceries they could last year, even after spending their entire allotment of food stamps. Students in reservation schools are increasingly dependent on free school lunches, not because of poverty alone, but because it's the only meal of the day that guarantees protein. At community health checkups, nurses have reported cases of mild childhood malnutrition, doubling in just 6 weeks. What makes this even more heartbreaking is the silence. There are no long lines for food banks, no TV cameras rolling, just the quiet erosion of each household's pantry, one by one. Minnesota, a state with deep agricultural roots, is now abandoning the very communities closest to the land. When a people who once lived off the forest, the earth, and the rivers can no longer feed themselves because of policies made far away, it's not just a food failure. It's a moral one. A reminder that while the government negotiates trade deals abroad, there are American citizens chewing on dry bread and staring out at their overgrown yards in silence. Number 6. Michigan. On the eastern shore of Lake Michigan, fishing ports like Muskegon, Ludington, and Alpena once brought in hundreds of tons of freshwater fish every week. That catch didn't just feed locals. It supplied poor urban areas like Flint, Pontiac, and the counties along the Canadian border with essential food. But since early August, that supply chain has begun to unravel. The government's new tariff policy sent the price of key imports for the seafood processing industry. Industrial frying oil, plastic packaging, preservatives, soaring by as much as 60% in just 3 weeks. The result, dozens of small processing plants shut down because they couldn't balance their costs. Fish that were caught were no longer processed and packaged, leading to massive waste, while retail fish prices in supermarkets shot through the roof. People aren't just hungry because there's less food. They're hungry because their livelihoods are disappearing. Small-scale fishermen on the state's western shore who live off year-round fishing suddenly have nowhere to sell. Some are dumping fish back into the lake because even at rock-bottom prices, no one is buying. The sight of fresh fish rotting on boats while families in Flint scrape by on cheap canned tuna is a bitter irony. In Detroit, community kitchens that once relied on freshwater fish for their main protein source now have nothing but beans and pasta. Lunch for the homeless is down to 2 dishes, mostly canned or frozen. According to the Food Bank Council of Michigan, food assistance requests at suburban centers have jumped 48% in just 6 weeks, mostly because, as one report states, people can't afford fresh food. Michigan, a state of lakes, fish, and communities long tied to the water, is now facing food shortages because of things that seem unrelated: packaging, cooking oil tariffs. And while lawmakers in Washington argue over trade policy here, a simple meal has become a luxury. Not because there's no fish, but because an entire system that fed people has been thrown into chaos by a single season of new tariffs. Number 7. Wisconsin. Wisconsin is America's dairy capital. In 2024 alone, the state supplied more than 14% of the nation's fresh milk. But the dairy industry here has never faced a crisis like this. Not because the cows are gone, but because the things that feed the cows and the systems that bring their milk to people's tables are collapsing in silence. Since August 1st, a wave of new tariffs on automated milking machine parts imported from Germany and the Netherlands sent repair costs skyrocketing. At the same time, cattle feed ingredients from Canada were hit with counter tariffs of up to 40%, causing feed prices to surge. The result, hundreds of small farms, barely breaking even before. were forced to cut their herds, go back to hand milking, or halt production altogether. Fresh milk output has plummeted, but the striking thing is, not every supermarket feels the pinch. In Milwaukee or Green Bay, you can still buy milk, though, at higher prices. But rural areas, schools deep in farm country, and nursing homes, places that rely on direct distribution from local farms, no longer receive milk consistently each day. According to the Wisconsin Dairy Council, more than 32% of schools in rural counties like Clark-Juneau and Richland have already cut back on fresh milk servings for students. Some nursing homes are switching to cheap powdered milk from reserve stock, even though it doesn't provide the same nutrition as whole milk. Many rural residents are asking, how can there be a milk shortage when the fields are still green and cows are grazing outside the window? But that's the essence of this crisis. It isn't about physical scarcity, it's about a broken system. One broken link. Milking machines feed transportation. Is all it takes to turn a glass of morning milk into a luxury item. In Wisconsin, hunger doesn't look like emptiness. It looks like a cruel irony. In the very heart of America's dairyland, millions of Americans can't get a simple glass of fresh milk. And this didn't come from a natural disaster. It came from policies wrapped in the name of protective tariffs. Number 8. Ohio. In Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Toledo, the sight of empty shopping carts is no longer unusual. At budget chains like Aldi, Save-A-Lot, and Family Dollar, once a lifeline for millions of low-income Ohioans, shelves for frozen vegetables, canned goods, and imported tinned meat now sit nearly bare. Since early August, new tariffs on imported food products from Europe, Mexico, and Canada have choked off the flow of cheap goods right at the ports. Discount retailers have always relied on low-cost imports. Frozen items, dry goods, canned foods, to keep operating expenses down. But now with tariffs on those items jumping from 15% to 40%, they can't keep prices where they used to be. Some suppliers canceled orders altogether. Others are delivering only in dribs and drabs. The fallout spread like an oil slick in counties like Lorain and Mahoning, where poverty rates top 20%. Residents can no longer find staples like canned beans from Mexico, tuna from Thailand, or soup from Europe. Many don't have cars to drive to big box stores, and even if they could, prices at the larger chains have climbed beyond what many families can afford. According to data from the Ohio Association of Food Banks, visits to community food pantries nearly doubled in July and August. Notably, almost 60% of those visitors used to be regular customers at discount stores, meaning they were once able to provide for themselves, but now they have no other choice. Ohio was once the face of America's working class, frugal, hardworking, able to make do in hard times. But when global supply chains snapped, and domestic tax policies tightened the vice instead of easing it, even the simplest dinner has become an impossible equation. An empty shopping cart isn't always a sign someone doesn't want to buy. Sometimes it's just that there's nothing left to pick from. And that's exactly what's happening every day in Ohio's working-class neighborhoods, where the squeak of cartwheels is now just a sad echo in aisles of barren shelves. Number 9. Kentucky. You don't need to ask anyone, just look at the parking lot behind the Louisville Food Distribution Center, and you'll see something is very wrong. Where dozens of trucks used to line up every Wednesday morning, waiting to be loaded, now only a handful remain. Silent, driverless, empty. The problem isn't the food itself. It starts at the very beginning of everything livestock feed and the trucks that haul it. Since early August, when new tariffs were slapped on imported corn and soybeans from Canada, the price of animal feed has nearly doubled. Small livestock farms, already living on the edge, could no longer afford to keep their herds of cattle and pigs. Some barns now sit empty. Others sold off young animals early just to stop the financial bleeding. That's led to an eerie kind of silence in Kentucky. Not because there aren't people, but because everything has stalled. The state's once proud fresh meat distribution network has gone into paralysis. In rural communities like Rowan-Whitley and Pulaski, small grocery stores report fresh meat deliveries down more than 70% in just 3 weeks. Public school kids no longer get meatballs for lunch. Nursing homes are switching to canned beans to keep costs down. A supermarket manager in Lexington put it bluntly, "We don't lack cold storage. We lack things to store in it." It sounded almost casual, but it carried a heavy truth. Kentucky has all the infrastructure it needs, but not the most basic thing of all, a steady supply chain unbroken by tariff policy. In this crisis, Kentuckians aren't shouting. They're quietly adjusting. Less meat, fewer choices, and less hope that next week will be any different. And while trade meetings in Washington are still debating percentage points, and retaliation clauses, working families in Kentucky are just trying to stretch what's left in their fridge. One more day at a time. Number 10, Georgia. Every year around mid-July, rural Georgia usually bursts with the buzz of blueberry and peach harvests. But this year, crates sit stacked on the edges of the orchards. Not because the crops failed, but because there's no one to pick them up, no trucks to haul them, and no steady market to sell them to. After the government slapped new tariffs on refrigerated containers and packaging supplies from Europe and Asia, hundreds of Georgia farm co-ops, many of them dependent on imported equipment, had to halt contracts to ship produce to other states. For local farmers, that meant one thing: fruit rotting in the fields, while people nearby go without anything fresh to eat. Small towns like Tift, Colquitt, and Appling rely almost entirely on in-state produce. When the fruit distribution chain broke, residents suddenly had no fresh options in their local stores. According to Feeding Georgia, the number of families in southern counties requesting fresh produce tripled in just 6 weeks. The result is a painful paradox at the height of harvest season. The land known as America's peach capital is importing frozen bananas from Texas, while millions of pounds of local peaches are dumped or left to ferment in the sun. A spokesperson from the Georgia Farm Alliance summed it up: "We're not short on food, we're short on a way to move it." When trade policy severs the arteries of transportation, it's not just farmers who bleed. It's the families who once lived beside orchards, who once plucked peaches from their own backyards, now standing in line for cans of fruit shipped in at a much higher price. And in that silence, Georgia is enduring one of its saddest harvests in years. 10 states, 10 different stories. But they all point to the same reality: America is facing something it has never faced before. A food crisis inside the very nation once called the breadbasket of the world. The bitter truth is, this crisis didn't come from drought or war. It came from policies written in the name of trade protection. From rural Georgia to small towns in Ohio, Americans are paying the price for strategic interest with empty refrigerators, thinner meals, and the growing sense they've been left behind. And if these first 10 states have already been pushed to the brink of hunger by tariff policies gone wrong, who can promise the rest of America won't follow? The crisis map is spreading by the day. The question now is no longer who's right and who's wrong on tariffs. It's how many more Americans will have to sacrifice their daily survival for decisions signed in an office 1,000 miles away.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today's analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.